All right, welcome. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our SCA webinar focused on one of the biggest challenges that we are seeing reported to date, and that is focused on project management. So what we're going to do today is definitely go over some techniques and strategies that you can use to improve your project management skills so that you can focus on what really matters most, right? That youth development. So today we have a number of people on the call with us, including some people from our NTAC team. So in addition to myself and Andrew, we'll definitely get some time to either share some strategies or best practices in the chat from the team. And of course, we are open to your engagement as well. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Shanika Peck. I'm one of the senior TA liaisons on the team for NTAC. I've been supporting technical assistance of 21st century programs. For NTAC, I've had the pleasure of working with SCAs in terms of developing that technical assistance plan and other supports to provide assistance to our 21st CCLC programs so that they are running high quality programming for our youth. I have with me today Andrew, who's also joining our call today. Andrew, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Shanika. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew Francis, and I'm a sub-grantee TA liaison with the 21st CCLC NTAC. I've been providing support to 21st CCLC programs for almost 5 years and have the privilege of also working as a out-of-school time site director, and before that managed several projects in the Jamaican education system relating to curriculum development and implementation, providing behavioral support for programs. So happy to be with you, Shanique, and to be with all our participants and to share and to also learn from them as we talk about this very important topic, of project management. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. And again, this is a highly requested webinar from the survey and the feedback that we've been receiving from a lot of our SCAs. So again, we will be sharing some techniques and skills, but we'll also cover those challenges that you may have been experiencing so far in your role. And of course, if we are talking about challenges, we would love to also cover those solutions. Now, before we get into the juicy details of project management, I do want to take some time to just reiterate 21st CCLC NTAC's mission and vision. Now, it is our vision to provide 21st CCLC professionals with the knowledge and skills that they need to implement high quality programming, right? So that means we are supporting our staff and our team so that we can empower our students and their families to become successful lifelong learners. Now, our mission is to provide you all, SCAs and your sub-grantees, with best practices, evidence-based resources, professional learning events, and other resources to help build the capacity of your 21st CCLC programs, right? So this looks like a number of things, right? So we are creating resources and technical support and trainings so that we can cover a number of priority areas. So a lot of the work that we do around building that capacity may look like supporting areas in terms of addressing impacts of COVID-19, providing equity of access to resources, supporting students' SEL needs, academic focus areas, statutory or programmatic requirements, and fiscal compliance. Now, when we mention academic focus areas, we do want to highlight a number of areas, right? So a lot of the content that we may provide you, whether it's during our universal support, such as webinars like these, or resources that you may find on the website, we aim to have a focus on a number of areas in terms of academics. So if it's focused on students, we're talking about those STEM activities or academic recovery, financial literacy, career pathways, just to name a few that's on this list. We also have some items of resources to support programmatic items, right? So we're thinking about how we can best support programs in rural areas or how we can best implement and evaluate our 21st CCLC programs, right? And that's just to name a few, but again, just a quick overview, and you'll understand from the experiences that you shared during these webinars that we are going to cover a number of things. So for today, again, we're focused on project management. So we are going to take some time to understand what makes project management so difficult, right? Again, we'll learn those different solutions to project management challenges, and then we'll take some time to reflect on these project management challenges that you are facing. Now, I do want to mention that in addition to this webinar, we're going to go over those different strategies, but I do want you all to be made aware that we have a tool coming out next month that will focus on how you can manage project management. So that tool will be coming out next month again, and then of course, we'll share updates with you post-webinar. So let's talk about why is project management so hard, right? So we know that project management requires a complex set of skills and of course unique abilities so that we can pay great attention to detail. We're also thinking about excellent time management skills, and we're thinking about all of these different things to make sure that we are putting in great effort into making sure things get accomplished, right? So as a project manager, or if you are leading a project, you must be able to create some kind of strategic alignment between all of your stakeholders involved in any given project. And this can look like a number of things for SEAs, right? Now, this also requires ongoing communication, right? We want this communication to be clear. We want it to be simple and focused, right? So you may be thinking about how you're communicating right now between your subgrantees or between your state team, your State Department team, right? Are you sending those long emails? Are you providing consistent follow-ups, right, to those emails, or maybe on a goal or a specific area? Now, on the other hand, of project management, we're also thinking about the abilities that we have to take an idea from conception to delivery, right? And ensuring that the final delivery meets quality expectations. Now, this may look like a number of things. Now, on the screen, you'll see resource planning, but honestly, it can look like grant management planning, right? Anything along the lines of putting together a number of moving parts to successfully implement a plan. Now, your ability to do all four of these things is what makes project management so hard, right? Now, some of you may be strong in one area, but again, it's all about how we manage all four areas so that we can be effective project managers. Now, with all of that being said, I do want to take some time here for you all to reflect really quickly. Now, what you can do is you can either share in the chat or you can use your annotation tool located at the top of the screen. You'll see that I'm sharing my screen. If you hover at the top, you'll see annotate. Use a annotate tool. You can use a stamp or maybe like a text. I like to use stamps, but go ahead and just identify which one of these areas is most difficult for you to achieve, or something, maybe it's an area that you would like to focus on. So again, is it the strategic alignment of project management? Is it the ongoing communication? Maybe it's the quality of how things are being delivered, right? Or is it around your planning, right? How are you developing a realistic resource plan or a realistic project plan or a realistic grant management plan? So go ahead and use your annotation tool and just identify which area, or if you're not able to use the annotation tool, you can let us know in the chat. Thank you, Watanya. So Watanya shared strategic alignment and planning is what they're finding hardest with project management. Now, some of you may have a lot of strengths here. Maybe you're strong in all four areas. So we're definitely looking for you to share those best practices in the chat, because of course, this is a great opportunity for us to all collaborate, right? How often are we able to meet with other SEAs from different states, right? Now, throughout this session, we will identify different strategies and plans that you can implement to improve your skills within these 4 areas. All right, so I'm seeing ongoing communication, right, and strategic alignment is definitely a hot spot for a lot of our SEAs here today. Ongoing communication. Wow, Andrew, looks like we're going to spend some time right here in this sweet spot right here, right? That strategic alignment and ongoing communication. Because of course, this hand may be influencing the other, right? If we have alignment with how we're strategizing these plans and communicating the vision and mission and our goals, then we'll be able to support the delivery of high quality plans, right?
Yep, I've seen that probably 3 persons are also identifying strategic alignment and planning. Think about getting it right from the start, and then how that, alignment transcends all the other aspects of project management as well.
Right. Now, as you think about some difficult areas in terms of your project management skills, you may also think about what you've already tried in response to these challenges. So if there's something that you've tried before and it just didn't work out, feel free to let us know. Chances are we will be covering a lot of potential challenges that you may experience in terms of project management. So what I'm going to do now, let me just go ahead and clear my screen. All right. Let's keep things going, right? So again, we're talking about why project management is so hard, right? Now, in out of school time, project management often presents like these complicated webs of challenges, right? Especially if we are working amongst different teams and supporting different groups of people, right? And so, for example, that effective communication would be essential, especially if we want to maintain clear timelines, right? But if the project scope isn't well defined, miscommunications can definitely lead to delays or unmet objectives, right? Same thing with resource allocation, right? So if tasks aren't adequately supported, right, without that proper time management, then all of the things that you're putting into place for resource allocation may actually just fall through, right? So when we're thinking about project management, we're also thinking about the different aspects of how we can provide support and how we can utilize our skills to help manage what is happening, right? And that also includes risk management, right? So we also want to keep in mind of how we can make this a seamless process to move from our starting point to our end point. And so it's very difficult because this ends up being a huge balancing act with a number of sensitive topics or areas in terms of project management. So with that being said, we would like to first highlight some high quality components of project management. So for the first portion, and this is more of like a workflow when it comes to project management, and you may see something similar to this in different areas related to project management or program management. But initiating is where we are defining the project at a high level, right? So we're identifying the objectives and whether or not the items are feasible for our program or for the year, right? We may be appointing project managers or stakeholders. Then in that planning component, we are developing a detailed project plan. So this may look like outlining tasks, timelines, or resources that we'll need to get the job done. Now, we're also establishing baselines for scope, schedule, and of course, costs. Now, this is also where we're thinking about risk management planning and setting up communication strategies, because again, that is a tough spot for a number of folks here, right? But it's also difficult to do if we don't know how to do it well, or if we have new members on our team or new sub-grantees that we must support. Another area is executing, right? So we are coordinating people and resources to carry out this plan. Now, we also want to ensure that our team members know their responsibilities and they are on track, right? Now, this also entails us managing our stakeholders' expectations and communications. Now, all of the things that I'm mentioning right now, we are going to address them throughout this webinar. So just sit tight. We're going to get there soon. Another area or key component of project management is that monitoring and controlling um, uh, uh, component here, right? So here, this is where we are tracking project performance against the plan that we established here, right? So this may include us making adjustments. Now that it's okay to do, right? If we realize a certain part of our plan isn't working out, whether it's a communication plan or how we are aligning or indicating our milestones or measures, if we need to make adjustments that is necessary to keep the project on task, that's something, or it's on task or on track, that is something that we need to be able to do, right? So this includes managing those different changes that may happen to your project's scope, schedule, or that cost. And then there's that closing piece, right? So here we're finalizing all activities to close out the project formally, right? This may include us reviewing any project outcomes. We're also reviewing lessons learned. We're releasing project resources. And of course, we are completing a project documentation process, right? We definitely want to inform all of those involved about what is happening, what has happened, and how we will move forward for the next year or for the next project, right? Now, those are the key components of project management. And again, we have a tool coming out next week that goes into detail on what each component may look like in terms of project management or program management. Now, one of the top challenges when it comes to building out these different components of project management is scope creep, right? Now, I mentioned scope a couple of times in the last slide, but scope creep is a common challenge in project management, and it's often characterized by continuous growth and uncontrolled changes to a project's scope. Now, I did mention, hey, it's okay to make those changes if need be, but sometimes scope creep can get the best of us, right? So it often comes up if there are unclear project requirements. It may come up where the initial objectives are vaguely defined. And some of you guys are already doing this right now. You may realize, hey, you know what? The objectives I have established in my RFP isn't really clear enough for subgrantees to kind of flesh out their program plans, right? This may also look like leading to an ongoing addition or modifications of the project as it progresses. Now, this may also look like insufficient stakeholder engagement, right? Which can make matters worse in terms of scope creep, right? So this may impact feedback or impact the consensus of not obtaining enough information early on, which of course may result in a misalignment of expectations and priorities, right? Now, this lack of clarity and control can lead to a ton of delays, right? So that may be something that you've been experiencing. It may lead to budget overruns, or maybe it may lead to like compromised quality of programming, right? So again, we're leaning into how we can well define these different qualifications and requirements so that we can flesh out a robust communication plan to prevent scope creep from happening here. Now, on the other side of the screen, we have some strategic solutions for the challenge of scope creep, right? So one of those solutions being a detailed scope of work, or SOW, so however you call it. But this is where we are clearly defining the project objectives, deliverables, any boundaries or exclusions that we need to make from the very beginning. This is very important within all of our organizations so that each player understands that they have a role in the work, So for example, if you have a TA provider like an OST network, or some states have their own technical assistance resource centers, if they aren't clear on their scope of work or their responsibilities, then it can make it very difficult for them to understand your workflow, right? Or they may be misinformed about your partnership with a statewide evaluator and where they may come into play. Having clear standard operating procedures, or SOPs, is also a strategic solution, where you may focus on creating a detailed and documented procedure around instructions on how things are being defined. Now, this is something that both Andrew and we work heavily with, right? Making sure we are fleshing out the SOPs so that not only we are aware of what is to come for each stage of the project, but so that our team is aware of what's to come and how we are organizing this process, right? So within your SCA, you may use SOPs to help inform how policies and procedures are created, drafted, and implemented, right? And you may also include the follow-up around it. Now, this may also include how you are communicating. Now, communication is going to pop up a lot throughout this session because it's very important with project management, right? Not just communication between our staff or within our state, but also with our stakeholders, right? So with your SOPs, you may have a communications coordinator who is leading and tracking your shared communication in your inbox or maybe a phone line. But SOPs actually provides us a solid timeline in which everyone will act accordingly and reply or respond however. All right, so I do see a comment in the chat. Thank you, Sean. So Sean is also a member from our NTAC team. Sean shared, scope creep happened a lot in my after-school program. We always had a tutoring element activity in our program, but during state testing, many leaders wanted to convert the entire program into a tutoring program only. That was out of scope. Tutoring was one piece of a larger picture, but wasn't the whole picture. That I've seen that happen plenty of times in a lot of programs, Sean, so you aren't the only one. So yeah, that's a great example. And again, this can go back to how things are being communicated with your stakeholders, right? So they may have their own understanding of what should be prioritized, but if we aren't aligning our scope, right, our scope of work, then it may be difficult for people to understand why we make the decisions that we're making. Of course, that is going to come, we're going to talk a little bit more about that throughout our session today. So in addition to having clear standard operating procedures, it's also important that we have a scope baseline comparison, right? Now, this is the process of evaluating your current project deliverables and objectives against the original scope baseline to assess any deviations and make sure there is some kind of alignment with the planned project goals. Now, this is something that I've, done a lot of work with. I've spent some time in the middle of my project and towards the end, just to see what I agreed to doing or what I planned on doing and where I am with how I'm delivering those different supports, right? So when you are continuously comparing your current project status against your original scope, you're able to identify any areas where you may be deviating from the original plan, or maybe something came up, right? So again, that's an opportunity for you to think about the lessons that could be learned during your project management. Now, using this may also look like looking at data, right, from year one of your cohort, or even subsequent years, right, to identify not just year-over-year growth, but maybe you can form a baseline over the 5 years, because some of us have programs that are running on a 5-year contract, right? And you also have impact analysis, right? An impact analysis allows you to evaluate the impact of requested changes on time, cost, and resources before approval. So this is an important strategy to use when looking at things like contracts, evaluators, and again, if you are working with TA providers like your OST networks or your own technical assistance resource centers. It's also important that we have change logs that can also help with our scope creep, right? So with a change log, you definitely want to maintain and record all change requests, their status, and the decisions made. I like to do this during stakeholder meetings just so that I'm keeping track of what actions that were presented and how we're following up on those actions. This can also look like having a plan around how you are going to track those different changes, whether it be number of students served by grantees, or maybe it's the scope of your TA contract. It can look like a number of things. But this is just a simple version of numbers, or maybe it can be complex, right? You can keep it simple if you like, but if you like a little bit more details, you can definitely add a list of number of the changes that you've been implementing. And then that last solution there, prioritization, is definitely an area that we can implement right away, where we can practice skills around implementing prioritization right away, right? So this is where we're prioritizing change requests based on their value and impact on the project's overall objectives, right? So if we're thinking about it, we know that not every demand requires an email, right? Or maybe every demand may not require the same time and effort as you would put into other demands, right? So we really have to think about how we're choosing to spend our time based on a number of things. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and look at Eisenhower matrix, and this will help us with prioritization, right? So the Eisenhower matrix is also known as the urgent important matrix. It's also a great time management tool, right, to help us prioritize those tasks based on its urgency and its importance. Now, of course, you know, this matrix is named after the president who used this, President Dwight Eisenhower, who used this principle for decision making, right? So, of course, we're going to talk about decision making processes too during this webinar. But this matrix is split into four quadrants or priority areas, right? So if we're looking at priority one, and you can let me know in the chat if you've used this matrix before. Also let us know how it's working out for you. But priority one, urgent and important, this is where we have tasks that are both urgent and important, right? So they require immediate attention. They may have significant consequences, especially if they aren't addressed promptly, right? So this may look like or include a crisis that may be occurring within your programs or within the state, right? This may include some pressing problems or deadlines. The focus here is on completing these tasks first to avoid any negative impacts. Then in priority two, which is important but not urgent, these tasks may contribute to a long-term goal or personal growth. So this may include planning or relationship building. This may also include skill development when we're thinking about our team. In this area, you may prioritize tasks here to prevent them from becoming urgent, right? Or prevent them from impacting ongoing progress. Then we have priority three, right? Urgent, but less important. Now, the task found in priority three area, they may involve interruptions or other people's needs, such as these meetings that you may be invited to on a weekly basis, maybe throughout the week. Maybe you have 5 to 10 meetings that you need to attend to. You may need to prioritize them based on their priority levels here, right? This may be a phone call as well. And the task that can be found in this area, it's always best to kind of delegate, right? Use our delegation skills here so that they can be handled and of course completed, especially if they are critical to tasks located in priority one. And we have priority 4, right? So it's less important and not urgent. So these tasks are often distractions, right? Or low value activities. And I smile because sometimes this can get carried away. I can get carried away with this throughout the day. You know, if it's something on my to-do list, when I just want to knock it off. And the next thing you know, I'm spending way too much time on that one task, right? You were talking about these trivial tasks that can be taken care of another time or eliminated. Through a different way, right? So the goal here is to avoid wasting time. We want to stay focused on the most valuable activities possible. So when we, kind of went back to, boom. So when we think about how we're prioritizing our task using these 4 quadrants, again, we definitely want to think more about how we can spend most of our time on activities that are in alignment with long-term goals and objectives. So let me just check the chat really quick. But while I'm checking the chat, feel free to take out your annotation tool again and think about what you have spent the majority of your time on today, right? Which priority area do they fall? Is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? Again, take out your annotation tool and just let us know, what have you spent the majority of your time on today? So priority 1 items, priority 2, priority 3, priority 4. I'm going to go ahead and check the chat because I see some comments from our team all the time. Learned it with the, okay, great. So a lot of people are using Matrix, right? 7 habits and use it for time management. I love the idea of using it for program items. Yes. Sometimes we can use it for our personal lives as well, if you ask me. Hey there, Candace. I need to print this out and make it on, post it on my board. It's a good reminder not only to organize my work, but to communicate tasks with our team, which is so important because sometimes, especially if this isn't communicated well, the items that we make prioritize as 1, urgent and important, may not be prioritized the same way with your team. And so this is where miscommunication can happen, or misalignment of tasks can happen, right? So it's really important that we get everyone on the same page. So I just asked, think about what you have spent the majority of your time on today. And it looks like we are focused on priority 1 and priority 2 areas, which is great. I'm hoping that you all were able to spend a great deal of time on what really matters for your program for the time being. But I do want you to think about what this looks like for your week, right? This Tuesday, by the time you get to Friday, think about what activities you were working on that would fall in priority areas 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? What does this look like for the month? Do you realize that you're spending a lot of time on priority 1 area items throughout over the next couple of months? And this may make sense, especially if you have an RFP out and you are awarding recipients, right? Or maybe you want to make sure that they get started on the right foot for the new school year. It's going to look like a lot of things, right? I also want you to think about how these different priority areas impact your effectiveness as an SCA, right? Because that is equally important. Now, again, if this impacts the effectiveness of you being an SCA, you may also think about your team, right? Right? What is happening with your team and how this may affect their work. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and clear my screen. Thank you all for sharing. Looks like we're spending a lot of time in priority 1 area, which makes sense, right? Because it's at the start of the year. We definitely want to start things off right on the right foot, right? All right, so now what we're going to do is we are going to make our way over to time management. I'm actually going to pass it over to Andrew.
Thank you so much, Shanika. And, as you spoke, it really dawned on me that it was a crucial lesson to learn, that not everything that's urgent is important or as important, and also vice versa. And so as we talk about time management, it's crucial for us to understand what are the common challenges that we face as, as SEAs, but also what are some solutions that we can implement to address those challenges. Because time management is indeed one of the topmost challenges that OST programs face. And that, includes just poor planning. Sometimes we experience unexpected delays. in program implementation and other related activities. And we also set unrealistic timelines. When we talk about poor planning, that can lead to a lack of very clear objectives, but also it affects the way in which we allocate our resources, right? And when we do not have clear objectives as to what we want to accomplish, and consequentially, we do not allocate resources efficiently, then that has domino effects on us then having disorganized activities, and we'll also miss deadlines. So there are these ripple effects that take place when we do not start with having clear objectives, and how it affects our time and the overall plan that we have and we want to implement. So as a result of that, we also may experience unexpected delays in terms of sometimes they're just unexpected or last minute changes to our schedules, and that may be schedules at our level, at the state level. And we may also experience staff absences for different reasons. Staff are not able to report for work, and that has also a number of logistical challenges or issues that come about. And so we find that our activities do not flow as planned, and there's just plain chaos in what we're trying to accomplish. Another time management issue is having unrealistic timelines. And we all get very excited about this work and we want to do the best. We want to be our best selves. But sometimes depending on when we are starting out in our roles or just where we are, or we may just reflect on what may have happened in the past month or past quarter or past year. And we want to just, go out with everything blazing. And for some reason, we end up setting unrealistic timelines. And it may just be because we also overestimate our capacity, or we underestimate just how complex a task may be. And so as we get out of those blocks very quickly, we find that we end up, experiencing burnout for ourselves as SEAs, but also as we provide support to staff. They also experience burnout, and we end up with stakeholders being disappointed because we're just not able to deliver as we said we would because of all these, competing factors and issues and challenges that we're facing. And what happens is that all of these challenges really hinder a smooth execution of our OST programs. And it has this ripple effect at the state level, but also at the program level, but also at the site level. I agree with you totally, Sean, as you're saying, as we're very enthusiastic because we want to do the best for our students and families. We want to do the best for our program directors who are depending on us as SEAs. And then we shortchange the timeline just to rush through to get the process. And then eventually there's burnout and we don't get to where we want to. So, but there are some solutions that we can implement to help us to, be impactful, to be effective in our efforts, as we try to manage our time. And a big part of that I've been told is that time management is how we manage ourselves and our use of time. And one of the first things that we want to do is to set some intermediate goals. Often we set these what I call big, audacious goals as to what we want to accomplish within a 3 to 5 year period, or even within a year. But if we're able to break down that larger goal into intermediate goals in terms of, okay, by the middle of this year, this is what I'd like to accomplish in terms of the support I provide in these strategic areas, as an SEA. Or breaking down those goals further by quarter, or even by month, or going further even by intermediate goals that you set by week as well. And it's really having those measurable milestones that can take you towards that larger objective as you are able to track progress. And I like to talk to in project management, oftentimes we talk about those being the predecessors, those activities that need to happen before we get to that larger goal. But you can track progress, you can see whether you are on track to accomplish the larger goal. It serves as a motivation for you as you're able to check off that, listen, we've been able to accomplish this within that timeline. But it also gives you a sense of direction as to what else do you need to do then as you move towards achieving the ultimate goal that you've established. I found that Gantt charts are also fabulous in helping you along that way, especially if they're color-coded Gantt charts that kind of give you an impression as to, visualizing the project timeline and also helping you to track that progress. And it goes back to all of what Shanika mentioned before in terms of those high-level aspects of the project, the initiating, the planning, the monitoring and controlling, the closing, all of that. Within those areas, you use a Gantt chart to help you to be able to identify what may be some potential bottlenecks, what may be hindering this project from advancing, from moving forward as it ought to. And so with Gantt charts, you may find that there are a number of project management softwares that are available that you can use. There's Asana, there's Trello, there's Microsoft projects. I've also had a chance to use Project Libre as well as one of those. And those softwares help you to plan, to schedule, and to monitor tasks. And often they're also linked to your email, so they give you, reminders, or you can also see the percentage of work that has been accomplished, and you can know whether you're on track or not, and what you need to do to, to burn more on the project, to get more of those activities in, and to be more advanced towards accomplishing your goal. And there are also other productivity strategies that you can use to manage distraction, to optimize use of your time, because there are so many competing factors. There are so many things that are demanding our attention. And so we have to be able to find those strategies. One of those strategies that will help to increase productivity is the Pomodoro technique. And if I butchered the Italian word here, please forgive me. But the Pomodoro technique is really a time management method, developed by Francesco Cirillo in the late 1980s. And essentially, Francesco Cirillo developed this technique to improve productivity and focus. And the technique is really named after the tomato-shaped kitchen timer. Pomodoro is Italian for tomato, right? And he used this timer while he was in university. No, what the process really involves is breaking down your work into intervals. Traditionally, there is this 25-minute length, for example, that's called Pomodoros, and that's followed by short breaks. Shanika and I joked about the fact that I've used this method before, and I found it to be very useful. So I power through some of my tasks in that 25-minute period, and I say, yay, I've accomplished so much. Let me take a 5-minute break. And this is on a timer. I'm timing myself. I'm not this period of productivity is timed, but also my break period is also timed. So as I work on a task, the timer would ring, I take my 5-minute break. No, it is also recommended that you could also try after you have completed 4 Pomodoros, you can then take a longer break for 15 to 30 minutes, right? And what this cycle really does is that it helps you to maintain your level of concentration and also mental agility by preventing burnout, but also minimizing distractions. Many of us, and the reality is this works for some of us, it may not work for others, but give it a try. But many of us, if you're trying to power through something for 30 minutes straight or 1 hour or more, we become easily distracted, and our minds become strained, and our attention is removed from that task. So if we can power through, reward ourselves for 5 minutes after that 25 minutes of accomplishing a task, it also helps to leverage just this psychological principle of boosting our efficiency. Because what it does is that it gives us a sense of urgency to get this done within this time interval or this time period. And it encourages us to stay focused, but also it encourages us to also just work faster towards getting this task done. And once you've done that task, in fact, as you're doing that task, you're being motivated by the fact that, hey, a break is on the way when I'm done with this particular task, right? Now, the second thing about the Pomodoro technique is that it prevents mental fatigue as well. It allows your mind to rest and rejuvenate. And it just promotes better planning of your time, better ways of managing yourself as an individual, as you prioritize tasks and as you estimate, okay, how many Pomodoros will it take for me to complete, putting together this RFP that needs to be released in a month, or right? Or how much time does it need for me to probably develop a scope of work for for the state evaluator in terms of what we're requiring them to do for an upcoming evaluation at the state level. So as you're breaking down those tasks into manageable chunks, the Pomodoro technique makes it, makes this big, daunting project more approachable, and it leads to higher levels of productivity, but also helps you with time management. So I see there's lots of conversation here in the chat. I want to take some time to process that. I recognize that, as Sean shared, it's a key point, no distractions, doing focus work, email, text, etc. And true break when you break, no break. And that's absolutely important. When it's break time, it's break time. When it's work time, it's work time. And we have so many other tools that can help us, like if you're using like Teams, etc. You can have your focus time set as well. And that minimizes, emails also that may be distracting you throughout, a focused work period. What Tanya says that she likes the idea, and Shanika says that it's also a good time for you to, put those the do not disturb settings on your phone and emails and all those other forms of communication. Thank you so much for sharing as a candidate that the technique really helped while writing your dissertation, especially when those morning writings, and morning seems to be the time for many of us to get those creative and writing juices flowing, right? So you can really, have that focus time to get that work done, and then take a break when you need to. So I'd like to hear from others in the chat. Go ahead and share with us. The Pomodoro technique is just one strategy. What other techniques do you use to stay focused or to get more work completed? I'd like you to share that in the chat with us so we can all learn from you as to how you are managing your time, how you are staying on top of your targets and activities, and ensuring that you're able to power through using various time management techniques. Anybody else wants to share something else that works for you? Shanika, do you have something else that you do? I see one here from Watania as I'm asking you to share. Plan out projects and a lot of time in your calendar. Yes, I do that too. I block off activities in my calendar as well, so that reminder comes.
Yeah, and then I also think about which projects will take the most time, and then like I tend to, give myself some flexibility when using this technique, because sometimes 25 minutes isn't enough for me to process information. I may need a little bit more time to process that information. I may break that project up so that I can process information, break, and then I can go ahead and make a plan in terms of like implementing any TA or strategies, or maybe creating that plan or meeting with others to create a plan in terms of what was processed. So yeah. It's a lot of great
ideas. Yeah, I recognize as well. This one that was just shared, I want to just highlight that, blocking time and planning for time with nothing to process and think about the next steps. I always say that as practitioners, we have to be reflective, but also reflexive. If you're just going to try to pause everything without stepping back to process and think, you're going to have the diminishing return. So if you want the return on your investment, take time to process and reflect on what you've done so far. Dave also shares that large and more urgent projects get time in the calendar. Everything else goes into a sticky note on the computer. I love that idea. So if it's in the computer, it's large and also more urgent, right? If your sticky note, just a reminder, this also needs to be done. Sean says, he schedules specific time too, and even put on an email response saying that I'll be responding to email in the evening, as today is a focus day. Then I turn off Teams. And yes, I've experienced that with you, Sean, and it's the most wonderful thing to see, because you also make it very fun as well. Just to share that, right? Shut down text until the end of the day because you're doing focused work. And that's important, that we recognize that everything is always urgent or important at the same time. So how do you balance that? And I also want to say, be gracious unto yourselves as well. If for some reason this 25 minutes did not go as it ought to, or this 50 minutes, Shanika, if that's your sprint period, then be gracious. Take another try at it until you get it right, because only as you practice, you can, really perfect and improve those time management skills. But thank you guys so much for sharing those wonderful ideas in the chat. Now, another challenge, is a matter of resource allocation, right? And this also affects our programs, because what we see sometimes is that there's the inefficient use of resources. Many programs complain about short of resources, that we hear very often. And it has domino effects. So if programs are having short of resources at their level, that's because as well they're short of resources at the state level or wherever else you may be functioning, providing support across a state. What we also find is that sometimes there's some level of imbalance between the availability of resources, but also how those resources are being utilized. So inefficient resources often stem from a lack of coordination or planning. So what we often do is that where we're not coordinating in a very efficient and effective way, then we find that we may have facilities that are not being used, effectively, right? Or you may have staff. I do recall in a previous job I had that the chief education officer was very clear that as we work towards having, leaner organizations, the focus was also ensuring that we don't have people bundling. And that's where we have too many people in one space or a particular work area, but they do not have sufficient work to undertake, right? So essentially those resources are being underutilized. And so ultimately that will also reduce the effectiveness of the program because people become distracted into all other sort of things. So you may also find that in many instances, our OST programs might have access to high quality education materials, but they fail to integrate them into their curriculum because they haven't planned it properly. They haven't spent time to go through their curriculum. They haven't offered the staff training for staff to know how to efficiently use those resources. And we are called upon at our level to provide guidance or officers that we support as to how they can use those resources more effectively by understanding the curriculum, how to integrate those resources, but also provide the training and the support that staff need to be effective implementers. We can also see resource shortages where these issues may show up as limited funding, or they may be just insufficient staff, which affects the program's ability to really provide the comprehensive and the consistent support that all the participants need. And we know that we constantly need more and more resources. And so it's important that we master that, we improve our skills in managing the resources so that they can really stretch, if you may, and it can help us to accomplish our goals. Now, we also see an imbalance between resource availability and utilization, which complicates the situation because in those instances, you may have programs that have access to a ton of resources, right? Sometimes you go and you may see, technological devices that may have been bought and they're just gathering dust, if you may, or they're locked away. They're nice and clean and beautiful and new as the day they were bought. Some of them, sometimes I see them, Shanika, they're still in plastic, not pulled out as yet, right? Or it may be situations where they may have access to extracurricular activities or those resources within the spaces that they may be using. But if we do not match those resources to the actual needs of the students, right, they are not being used efficiently. And so that also diminishes the impact of the program. And so we have to, at our level, be able to understand how to properly allocate resources, but also support programs in matching, in aligning those available resources with the needs that we've identified through needs assessments or to other forms of, of reviews or evaluation. So some solutions help us to get to the heart of that is resource leveling, right? And this is really a project management technique that is used to adjust our project schedules and our workload so that we're better able to balance the use of resources. I know there are some programs that go down to the very T in terms of determining, okay, we'll be implementing this curricula within this particular semester or within this quarter or this period. And as such, we will allocate these resources. So it requires effective planning and long-term, long-range planning by program directors, by site coordinators, so that you can then allocate resources, according to planned activities and ensure the resources are used efficiently. And we know sometimes there may be some delays or there may be some challenges here and there, but for the most part, we want to be intentional in how we plan and how we allocate those resources. You may be required to adjust your project schedule as well to kind of balance the demand for resources, based on the availability of those resources. Now, the next thing is that sometimes the knowledge and the skills reside in only one staff in terms of, how to allocate resources. And so we want to also implement some cross training so that our team members are able to use and develop multiple skills, to be more flexible and to adapt to changing project needs as well. There's also options for strategic outsourcing where we can, just outsource some of the tasks or functions to external vendors. I know many states do that in terms of having TARCs, as Shanika mentioned before, technical assistance resource centers, or it may be also outsourcing some activities to another technical assistance provider, or some evaluation or any other activities that can be outsourced so that we're more strategic in our approaches. And that happens especially when you do not have enough people internally to be able to, address the project needs. So with limited resources, we can outsource some of the services. It's also beneficial to conduct some sort of a workload analysis as well, because as you analyze the workload over time of a team member, you can then determine where there's potential for burnout, and you can prevent that from happening. But you can also efficiently distribute those tasks to different team members, because you're basically allowing people to share some of the practices where it's feasible to do so, but also you're able to borrow some resources from other projects or departments that may be underutilized at a point in time. Because we know that projects go through different cycles, and so you have very busy periods, you may have some slower periods. So how can we leverage the supports and resources from other departments or projects to help us, in moving the project forward and to address any resource shortages? And with that, we see some comments again in the chat. So Sean, she's like, giving staff planning time and prep time, very important, very, very important that we consider that in our planning process, because many times there's so much limitation that staff only getting for like a half an hour before a program starts, or sometimes they're getting just in time for program to start without any time for planning. But I know some programs have built in, time for planning per week, and like an hour per week or so. And that's one of the challenges that programs definitely face. So if you have ideas or best practices on how you provide opportunities about planning and prep time, separate from time to implement a curriculum or implement activities, we'd love for you to share that. But in addition to that, I'd like for you to share if you have any thoughts on, something that you do that benefits cross-training as well. So do you do any form of cross-training for your staff? And you found it to be very, very beneficial in addressing resource allocation challenges? We'd love to hear that from you, so other programs can also see how they can implement those as well. So whilst you're sharing those ideas about cross-training, I'd like to just keep it rolling by talking about this workload analysis, which I mentioned earlier on. And workload analysis is very central for project management, for effective project management, but also for team productivity, because as I mentioned before, it helps in allocating tasks and resources efficiently, but also ensuring that we have realistic timelines and also that we're balancing workloads. Now, to complete a workload analysis thoroughly, you want to start by first evaluating whether the total work assigned within a given week can be realistically completed within that time frame. And that takes careful planning to figure out. And I remember with projects that I've done and continue to do now is to figure out, okay, how many man hours do we think it would take within a day or within a week to complete this particular task, right? So we're assessing if the work is distributed evenly among team members, and to ensure that nobody is overburdened, because this is the cry at all levels where after school programs are concerned. When people feel overburdened or overworked or just overtaxed, right? Now, as we examine the work week, we can determine if the workload is manageable and balanced, and then we can then make adjustments if necessary to prevent any efficiencies in the system, in the workflow, or also prevent burnout. From there, we can shift our focus to the overall project timeline to see, okay, what adjustments do we need to also make there so that we can still accomplish and achieve what has been set within the established deadlines, and ensure that we're also allocating those tasks also in a fair manner to staff as well. And then as you work through that work week and move to look at your project timeline, at a bigger level, we can also then finalize the individual time segments by checking to see, whether people have completed their assigned tasks within the time frames. And what this steps does, that it ensures that we can be more realistic in what can be accomplished at the micro level. And so as we plan for future projects, or as we make adjustments to the project timeline for your current projects, you can then avoid any delays, but you can also ensure that your goals are being met, and that you're doing so in a very effective way as well. So we've talked about the matter of time and workload and resources actually has been difficulties. I want to spend some time talking now about risk, right? But of course, I did ask for some ideas about cross-training, and I see a comment here coming from that some of the programs would give a cross-train or a share day once a semester per instructor. Awesome. Basically, the team would cover the labor, and that instructor would literally go to another OST program in the grant, just another site, right? To see how they do things. And this is something we could do all the time, but by seeing what each other did, we got new ideas, and it helped by us learning best practice. Awesome. And I want to applaud that idea, because it definitely works, that we're able to cross-train, whether it may be across sites within a multi-site program, or even within an existing site. We can also take steps to cross-train as well, so that people can fill some gaps. People can, as working collaborator, can fill where another staff member may be burdened by a particular work activity, and they can be supported in moving the project timelines and the goals forward. So let's talk about risk management now. And this is also very common in project management, because it's really about identifying and evaluating potential risk as well, because risk can impact your project outcome. So we want to be able to mitigate those risks. Now, mitigating risk, really lies at taking proactive strategies, because when we take proactive strategies, we're really moving in a direction where we are, identifying what could be a risk and developing, solutions or responses to that, rather than reactively responding when something emerges, right? So it's planning in advance to address those. Now, when we are reactive to risk, it often leads to, other issues that may emerge, that also escalates the nature of the problem. And in turn, that will cause delays in our project. We may end up having budget overruns, so we're spending more than we expected in a particular area. And worst case, the project may fail or really go in a direction that was totally not envisioned, right? But as we're taking proactive risk management, it requires that we identify those risks. That's the first step in the process, but also evaluate the processes during the project planning phase and anticipating what those obstacles may be, and then having strategies in place for that. So that looks like us doing our risk audits, right? So we are also conducting risk audits to ensure that there's compliance, right, with risk management policies and procedures. And some of us may have risk analysis or risk management departments that can support us with that process, but it's something you have to do. You want to ensure that you have some policies and procedures in place to assess, or to audit, the level of risk that may be occurring in your program, and then also developing action plans as to how you'd identify those risks, what steps you would take, and who would be responsible to take those steps, but also timelines for addressing those risks if they do emerge. And in addition to action plans, you want to also ensure that you have some contingency plans in place, which is really, ensuring that you identify those high priority risks and having in place what's going to be our quick response if they do materialize. So it's all a matter of probability that this may occur, but if it does, this is how we're going to respond to that. Now, when it comes to risk management, there are 4 approaches that we can take. So we can either go the route of avoiding them, right, which is to change the project plan completely to eliminate the risk or its impact. We could also go the route of mitigation, which is to implement strategies to reduce the likelihood or impact of the risk. Or we could transfer that risk to a third party, right? So that could be through insurance or outsourcing, which we mentioned before in terms of having others carry out those tasks. Or we could also decide to accept the risk. And that often happens when it's unavoidable, right? Or if we were to take steps to mitigate, the cost will be much higher than the potential impact. So we can either avoid, mitigate, transfer, or accept. So I'd like for you to do some reflecting now, and we're gonna actually, share with you two scenarios, and we're gonna also launch two polls. And we'd like for you to listen, but also read the scenarios that are presented, and share with us which risk management scenario would you choose. So our first scenario is a sub-grantee is planning a field trip to a local science museum. The trip involves transportation, managing a large group of students, and ensuring their safety throughout the trip. Which of these risk management strategies would you choose? Would it be avoidance, as you take steps to change the project plan to eliminate the risk of its impact? Would you go the route of mitigation, which is to implement measures to reduce the likelihood of or impact of the risk? Or would you transfer that risk, to a third party, such as to insurance or sourcing? Or would you say, okay, I'm gonna accept this risk because it's unavoidable, and the cost of mitigation would be be higher than the potential impact? By any chance, if you're not able to access the poll and to complete that, please go ahead and put your response in the chat. You could put AV for avoidance, or just spell the word or completely, whatever works for you. Or tell us, would you mitigate, would you transfer, would you accept? But also share with us why. Why would you go the route of mitigation or acceptance, which I think most people or some people have selected so far? Why are you choosing one over the other? And I've seen there's an even split currently between those who are saying they'll mitigate, means that they will put measures in place. I know many states have, what they call field trip policies, right? Which include measures for, reducing the potential impact of the risk associated with taking these large set of students, and ensure that they are safe, because that's a priority number one for after school programs, that students are safe. We also see them accepting the risk because it may be unavoidable, or the cost of mitigation may be very costly. Thank you for sharing your responses, and pretty much try to share with you what may be the likelihood as to why you would go one way or the other. Our second poll, which we'll launch. So your state is introducing new data collection software to support quality improvement of 21st CCLC programs. This software requires student data submission and tracking. What would you do? Would you take steps to avoid, mitigate, transfer, or accept the risk associated? And while you're thinking about that, I do see Watanya showing that they have a field trip policy. Prior approval is required before going on a trip, because you want to weigh the pros and cons, and to see whether, depending on what may be in your policy, whether there are details as to the nature of the trip, and provisions for safety, and for transportation, and just managing large group of students, whether all those key areas are covered. So thank you for sharing that in the chat, Watanya. But let's share your thoughts now. Data collection software, new one being rolled out by your state as you take steps to improve the quality of your programs. But this software requires student data submission and tracking. What's gonna be your choice? Are you gonna accept, which I see some persons are saying so far they will accept that risk, right? And for obvious reasons, because of course you are required to report on student participation, on demographics, on activities, and also report on student outcomes as well, as per the GEPRA. So some people are saying yes, they'll accept. They'll accept that risk, because it's absolutely important to the requirements, and the guidance provided for you implementing that grant. Thank you so very much for sharing your thoughts and ideas. And I'm sure you have thought about why you have chosen those responses, because that informs your approach, as you look at managing your own risk in implementing the program. So thank you for sharing so far on those key challenges, but also solutions for addressing those as we look at, project management. I'm going to hand it back over to Shanika, and she'll talk to you about the communication issues that can also arise and how do we take steps to solve those as we manage our projects.
Of course. And this is something that we brought up quite a bit throughout this session, right? Communication, which is really important when it comes to effective project management. Now, the two most common challenges in this area is around insufficient communication with your team or stakeholders, or there's a lack of follow-up. Right. So if there is a insufficient communication with your team, that means we may not be clear, or your team may not be clear on their roles or their responsibilities. If you have subcontractors supporting different aspects of your project, they may not be clear on your progress, on the progress of the project entirely, right? Now, this, of course, will lead to confusion or inefficiencies, or you're realizing that these items may not be prioritized the same way that you are prioritizing them for the plan when you're thinking about your team and those different stakeholders, right? Now, you may have stakeholders because of insufficient communication, they may feel disconnected, right? Or misinformed about the results of the project, or possibly have misalignment with their expectations. And so their support may begin to diminish, right? Now, that lack of follow-up can also lead to tasks falling through the cracks. Now, again, we talked about that scope creep and things like that, but communication comes into place because we really need to do a good job around making sure we are addressing any missed deadlines so that we don't lose the momentum of our project, right? So there are a number of solutions that we can use to address these communication issues or challenges. And that may start with having a centralized information hub or a location that is shared with all members on the team and your stakeholders. And this may be something that you're doing right now, right? So if you have a shared Google Drive or a SharePoint, or maybe it's a website that is open so that others can contribute to that website, or maybe this could also look like a project management tool that Andrew brought up quite a bit in the very beginning, the last couple of slides, right? Now, in the centralized information hub, this is where important documents are placed. Updates or any resources can also be stored here, but we're also thinking about whether or not these resources are accessible to our grantees, right? Another solution is outlining those methods and frequency of how and when we are going to communicate, right? When should this communication occur? We may realize, and this is something that I've recently done with my stakeholders, right? You may establish a weekly meeting with your stakeholders, but you realize not enough, that doesn't give enough time to have your stakeholders implement the work and document any progress or changes. So you may consider changing the frequency of how often you are meeting, or you may think about how often you are conducting any reviews with your subgrantees, right? Now, this may look like you outlining a schedule for the year that includes those trainings, whether it be virtual or in person. This may also include office hours. Now, we've seen a lot of states already implement this solution, which is great. But again, we're also thinking about our stakeholders and anyone who may be part of that project. And because of their role and responsibility with the project, you definitely want to make sure you are implementing a solid communication plan where you are meeting on a consistent or a regular basis, right? So again, another solution is making sure you conduct those regular meetings and check-ins with the necessary individuals or groups that are a part of this project, right? Now, in addition to supporting your team or your subgrantees with these regular check-ins or these one-on-ones, it can also look like a one-on-one, right? This can also look like making sure you are documenting or providing a schedule around site visits, or possibly hosting a time for your subgrantees to ask you individualized questions. Again, so this is something that a lot of states are already doing if you're hosting those office hours. If you aren't hosting office hours, or maybe you host an office hours, but you haven't been consistent with it, now's a pretty good time to kind of have a plan put into place to support that. Now, another solution, and we're going to spend some time around this solution, is focus on a clear role definition, right? We definitely want to make sure we have our roles clearly defined and communicated amongst the team so that this can avoid any confusion or an overlap in the work that is being done, especially if you are working on a team where you have multiple people who are supporting 21st CCLC programs, but they're also managing other projects, right? So this is where you may think about who on your team needs to be a part of your plan in terms of their region or area of support or the need, or maybe you're thinking about fiscal and programmatic changes that you would need to divide amongst your team members. And so this is where we're going to pull in another matrix here, RACI matrix. If you're familiar with it, please let us know in the chat box. But this is where we help clarify the roles of our team and our responsibilities, right? Now we're thinking about who should be involved here. Okay, so the RACI acronym stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, right? Now, this represents different levels of involvement for each team member in various projects. You may also think about how your stakeholders are involved when we're using this matrix. Now, if you have team members who are focused on that responsible piece, we're thinking about the individuals or a group who will be completing that task, right? Who will be carrying out that activity. When we think about accountability, we're thinking about the people who will be providing answers for these tasks, right? This person may have authority to approve or sign off on work, or they may be overseeing a group of individuals who are responsible for that activity. Then we have consulted, right? Now, this involves individuals or groups who you may consult, right? Gather input to inform your project. Now, this is typically, our subject matter experts or maybe your subcontractors who are providing their expertise and knowledge around a certain task or an area. So this individual, the consulted, they play a key role in that decision-making process. But of course, they aren't directly linked to the execution of those activities. And then lastly, we have the informed, right? Now, this is where we have that group of people who need to be updated on the progress or outcomes of the task or the outcomes of that project, but they do not directly contribute to the works, right? So we're thinking about just that top layer of this ecosystem of work when it comes to those different individuals and groups that may come into play. Now, it's really important that we use something like this matrix so that we have a better understanding of the roles and responsibilities. It definitely helps with clearing up any confusion amongst the different parties who may be involved, but also helps us streamline the workflow, right? So if we're thinking of our SOPs and our scope of work, we definitely want to identify the different people who may be involved and what their tasks may look like. So what we're going to do really quickly is we're going to practice implementing this matrix, right? So here we have a scenario, and I'm going to go ahead and read the scenario, but you are going to let me know who in this scenario should be tasked with either responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. So here we have the site coordinator who has been tasked with updating the emergency procedures per feedback from their last monitoring visit. She is supposed to work with the school principal to complete this. Her supervisor, the program director, gave her the contact information for the OST network TA provider who has resources in emergency planning. So who should be responsible in this scenario? Is it the site coordinator, the OST network TA provider, program director, or SCA representative? Who's responsible for this? All right, a couple of things came in. Oh, great. Okay, great. So far we see that, let me see if anything pops out. Yeah, you guys must have used this plenty of times before. Yes. So the site coordinator should be responsible for this overall project, right? Because they are on the ground doing the work. I see that I think a lot of people agreed on the OST network provider as being the entity that is consulted, right? Which I totally agree, right? Because they aren't directly impacting the work. They can be consulted, especially if you're thinking about those different resources. And then see, program director, I see that could be responsible or accountable, held accountable. But in this case, I'm going to go with accountable here, right? Because the program director is overseeing the emergency procedures that may be occurring within the program site. But of course, this is dependent on the last monitoring visit, right? So they are making sure the site coordinator is following through. Then you have the SCA representative, right? So this person, again, they are further removed from the actual activity and they are being informed, right? So you guys are often informed on what changes have been implemented based on your feedback during those different monitoring visits. Let's go to one more example. Thank you. The State Department of Education uses one data and reporting platform across all programs and is switching platforms. The subgrantees require training on how to use the platform and setting up their accounts. So again, we're going to release a poll. You're going to let us know who should be held responsible, who should be held accountable, who should be consulted, and who should be informed. And the roles that we have at the top our state data and reporting manager, OST network TA provider, program director, and SCA representative. Now, this scenario sounds like a lot of what I've seen so far with different programs if we're thinking about data, because this pops up a lot when it comes to project management, right? All right. Thank you. So our state data and reporting manager should be held responsible, right? Especially if we're using those different platforms for reporting. And then it looks like we have a mix between the OST network TA provider and the program director. I'm going to go with the OST network TA provider should be informed, right? It's actually mixed. It's between, I see a couple of people. Oh, the votes are coming in. It's starting to change up a little bit, Andrew. It's changing a little bit, right? And of course, this depends on the relationship that your stakeholder may have in supporting, in this case, data and reporting platforms, because we do have or have seen technical assistance centers or OST TA providers who are assisting with being consulted in terms of data and reporting and using those platforms versus just letting them know, like giving them the heads up around the platform that's being used, right? And the same thing with program directors. So originally I was thinking that program directors could be consulted, but in this case, I don't know, we can, definitely be on the fence here on a number of things. Again, it depends on the work that they do in supporting 21st CCLC programs, because we know that sometimes we play a number of roles in supporting 21st CCLC programming, right? So everyone's either sharing that they can be held accountable or they can just be informed of these updates, right? Now, if you're a program director, I'm hoping that you could be accountable for this, especially if you are serving multiple or wearing multiple hats, but they can also be consulted, right? Especially if they are working on a team with a number of folks here. And then the SCA representative, right? You're in between responsible, or accountable. A lot of our SCA teams may be implementing a platform that they would like their subgrantees to use. So yes, of course, that definitely makes sense. But sometimes you may have states that kind of put the use of data and reporting platforms in the hands of their subgrantees, right? I've seen states that use maybe a Google Drive so that programs can share any data and things like that there. Some states are responsible for sharing those different platforms. So of course, it depends on the many hats that one may be wearing on your team, but definitely consider the amount of projects that they are part of when it comes to supporting 21st CCLC programs, because that will definitely influence your decision around whether or not they should be held responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed, right? All right, so the next common challenge is around stakeholder engagement. And I kind of brought this up a little bit, I brought this up a little bit before, right? In terms of stakeholder engagement, if there's a misalignment with communication, there may be conflicting expectations, right? This may be difficult to reconcile, especially if your stakeholders have different views on what should be prioritized or how projects should be tackled. They may have different interests, again, depending on their role. A lot of our stakeholders may be wearing multiple hats in terms of supporting these types of projects. And so they may be prioritizing your project differently compared to how you are prioritizing it. Unclear and duplicative scope of work, right? Now, again, this is really important. This is where communication comes in again. We definitely want to make sure that we are communicating effectively and clearly around our scope of work. And this can definitely lead to a lot of misunderstandings or an overlap in efforts. Sometimes we're working on a project and we don't realize that others are also working on the similar task that we are. It's really important that we communicate our scope of work and make sure that we are all clear around how stakeholders are engaged in these projects. Now, again, we have a number of different solutions here. We can definitely use mapping, right? You can have a stakeholder map, similar to an organization map, kind of, right? But really visualize the relationship that your stakeholders may have on different levels. Now you may also have a communication plan. Again, communication comes up quite a bit during project management, but again, you are communicating a plan where you are communicating with stakeholders. You're thinking about the method and how frequent you should communicate with these stakeholders. You may also have advisory committees, right? And this is where we establish those committees or councils to kind of provide some input and guidance around how things are getting done. And then we definitely want to focus on acting on feedback. And this is something that we can work on ourselves, but also we've seen this with our subgrantees, right? We're providing these suggestions during our monitoring visits, but how will this feedback be implemented? And that's something that could be quite difficult. Now, when it comes to implementing feedback, that can bring up a common issue called analysis paralysis, right? So think about, maybe your subgrantees feel overwhelmed with the amount of data that they must provide, right? This may lead to different delays in gathering that data. This may take your team some time with analyzing that data or reporting it or implementing those changes. But things like that can be counted as analysis paralysis. So this is where the decision-making process takes some time because you just have way too much information, right? And so with all this extra information, this can make you take your time or kind of pause your opportunity to take coursive action right away. So what we like to do is separate these things into two areas, right? So that first area or stage or phase, if you'd like to call it, is that sense making. So we have a ton of data, but we definitely want to use this data that we are collecting to identify those different patterns and gain a clear understanding of the situation before we go ahead and implement any decisions. That second stage, which is decision making, you definitely want to think about these three areas in terms of decision making, right? Now, Of course, when we are collecting this data and we're identifying these different patterns, we also want to think about how we can get as many good ideas so that we can settle on what should work best for the group so that we all can win. And this may require us to identify a block remover, right? So have someone in leading the approval cycle of your decision-making process, right? You may go back to your stakeholders and ask for some guidance here, but you definitely want someone to help navigate those requirements or navigate the different constraints that may happen with analysis paralysis. You may also want to implement those checkpoints. So if you already have some milestones in place for your subgrantees, it's also helpful to have some milestones or some checkpoints for your team as you go ahead and implement that project management. Then you have approximate decision makers, right? Now, this is one of the most challenging behaviors in any kind of organization that we see because that requires a lot of work, right? And sometimes this may require unnecessary rework or unnecessary activities that we aren't prioritizing as number one, right? So if you are working with a team, it's really important that you designate someone who can be a solid representative of the entire team to go ahead and make that final decision based on what you are presenting. Now, we have a ton more of these different challenges and possible solutions. And Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're up on time, unfortunately. But this does not mean that this will be the end of what we can do to support those different areas in terms of project management. So what Andrew just dropped in the chat just now is a survey link. If the survey link is not working for you, I don't we see we're gonna
Probably
drop.
ask Dave to repost it for us if anything, Dave Mazza or Dave McConnell, if possible. They're still here. And we'll try to get that to you, Monica. So sorry for the link not working. Let's get a correct link to you. Yeah, go ahead, Shanika, with wrapping up.
So
Yeah.
as we continue to work out what skills we need to effectively implement project management, I do want to spend some time to just allow everyone to reflect on their top challenge, because again, this will not be the only opportunity for us to support project management for our SEAs, but we definitely want you to think about what is your top challenge so that it can be addressed. Now, again, we will be releasing a tool to support project or program management that will come out next month. But go ahead and let us know in the chat box, or you can use your annotation tool and just let us know what your top challenge is. I believe we were able to cover almost every single thing on the screen, if not through the slides. We also had a lot of different discussions in the chat box around these different topics, but definitely let us know what was a top challenge for you.
So I reposted the link, Shanika, and I think that one should be working now. So I hope Watanya and Monica are able to use that. Sorry about that.
All right, so as you think about that top challenge in terms of project management, I do want to just post up really quick ways that you can stay informed. Again, we'll continue to support you through project management. We have a tool coming out next month to support this topic. But if you haven't already done so, take a look at the resources that we have available on the website. Send us an email at info@21cclcntac.org if you have any questions, any burning questions that you'd like to follow up with us on if you aren't able to join our next SEA office hours. If you haven't already done so, definitely sign up for our newsletter and follow us on social media, whether it's on X or LinkedIn. But thank you everyone for joining us. Great suggestions in the chat box. Hopefully you are able to walk away with something new, a new strategy today, or just reassurance around how you are implementing project management for your state.